Imagine you are lying in bed late at night scrolling through your phone when suddenly you remember that one day you will die. Not in a vague philosophical way, but in a real physical one. Your brain whispers, by the way, your heart is just a meat pump and one day it will stop. Sweet dreams. You panic, drop your phone on your face, and start calculating how much time you might have left before you become compost. Congratulations, you have just experienced what medieval monks called a perfectly normal Tuesday. Death anxiety is not new. People have been lying awake freaking out about it for thousands of years. And back in the 15th century, when life expectancy was shorter than your Netflix watch list, they actually came up with a whole handbook for how to die well. It was called Ars Moriendi, which is Latin for the art of dying. Because apparently medieval people were like, you are going to die anyway, so you might as well do it with style. Now you might think medieval death advice is just a dusty pile of superstitions. But here is the thing. They had a point. In our modern world, we have traded the plague for Pilates and replaced gallows with gluten-free diets, but the fear is still there. We just cover it up with streaming subscriptions, Instagram filters, and pretending that green smoothies make us immortal. The medieval mindset was different. They stared death right in the face, no soft lighting, no flattering angle, and said, fine, you are coming for me, but I am going to be ready. The Ars Moriendi was basically the self-help bestseller of the Middle Ages, teaching people not just how to die, but how to stop letting the fear of death ruin the living part. The manual had two main versions, a long, wordy one for people who had the time, and a short, illustrated one for people who preferred the medieval equivalent of a graphic novel. Think of it as the 15th century For Dummies book, except instead of learning Excel shortcuts, you were learning how not to scream in existential terror as you took your last breath. The central idea was that dying well was not about dying painlessly, but about dying prepared. That meant facing down 5 big temptations at the deathbed, which they believed could wreck your spiritual peace. And even if you are not religious, the wisdom here still applies, because those 5 temptations are basically the same mental junk that messes with our lives today. Temptation 1. Loss of faith. In the medieval world, this meant doubting God when the end was near. Today, it might look like losing hope or meaning in general. It is that moment when you think, well, life is pointless. I am just space dust, and nothing matters. The medieval solution was not denial. They actually encouraged people to talk through their doubts with someone who could help them reframe. Modern translation? Do not wait until your deathbed to think about what makes your life meaningful. Build that sense of meaning now, so when the scary thoughts show up, they are knocking on a well-defended door. Temptation 2. Despair. Back then, this was the fear that your mistakes and sins were unforgivable. Today, it is the same thing dressed in self-help yoga pants. It is the voice that says, I have messed up too badly, my best days are over, so why bother? The medieval fix was to remember that redemption was possible until the very end. The modern fix? Stop thinking one bad chapter means the whole book is garbage. People love comeback stories, and you are allowed to be the protagonist in your own. Temptation 3. Impatience. In the 15th century, this meant resenting the slow crawl toward death. In our time, impatience is practically a lifestyle. We want instant results, instant healing, instant closure, and instant noodles. But death, like life, is not a process you can fast forward without consequences. The medieval advice was to accept the timing. Modern translation? Stop rushing through your days like they are errands you just want to check off. If you can make peace with waiting, you can handle anything. Temptation 4. Pride. In the Middle Ages, this meant arrogance about your spiritual state, thinking you had it all figured out and did not need help. In modern life, pride often shows up as pretending you are fine when you are not. It is that everything is great lie you post on social media when you are actually one burnt piece of toast away from a meltdown. The medieval antidote was humility and gratitude. Today's version? Be willing to admit you do not have all the answers, because newsflash, nobody does. Temptation 5. greed. This was about clinging too tightly to possessions, relationships, or even your own life. We do it now with Amazon deliveries, overstuffed closets, and the idea that forever is a guarantee. The medieval response was detachment, not in a cold, I do not care way, but in a freeing, I will appreciate this while I have it way. The modern equivalent is learning to let go without turning into a minimalist who lectures their friends about owning too many forks. These 5 deathbed temptations were not just about death, they were about life. The Ars Moriendi was basically saying, if you can deal with these now, dying will be a lot less scary, and so will living. That is huge, because most modern mortality anxiety is really just life anxiety in disguise. You are not scared of dying, you are scared of running out of time to do something meaningful before you die. And here is where medieval wisdom meets 21st century science. Today, psychologists talk about something called terror management theory, which is the fancy way of saying humans spend a lot of energy pretending death is not real. When we get reminded that it is, our brains go into overdrive, trying to defend our egos and reinforce whatever makes us feel safe. That is why people double down on their beliefs, post more selfies, or suddenly take up marathon training after a funeral. But modern research also shows that accepting death can reduce anxiety, boost gratitude, and make you more present. That is basically the Ars Moriendi with fewer plagues and more TED Talks. One modern strategy that lines up perfectly with medieval advice is something called Memento Mori, which is Latin for remember you must die. The Stoics loved it, medieval monks loved it, and now Silicon Valley life coaches are trying to sell it to you with motivational mugs. The point is not to be morbid, but to keep your priorities straight. If you keep the reality of death in view, you are less likely to waste your time on dumb arguments or chasing things that do not matter. Another crossover? Ritual. Medieval people were big on rituals around dying because they created a sense of control in a situation that was literally out of control. Modern life has fewer rituals, which is maybe why so many people feel lost when someone dies. Creating your own rituals, even small ones, can help. Write letters to people you care about now instead of at the last minute. Have real conversations about what matters to you. And for the love of all things holy, make a will, because nothing kills the vibe at a funeral like a family inheritance brawl. There is also something to be said for medieval-style community. Back then, dying was a public event. People gathered, prayed, and supported each other. Today, we tend to push death into hospitals and hospices, out of sight and out of mind. But avoiding it just makes the fear worse. Studies show that people who talk openly about death have less anxiety about it. So maybe instead of awkwardly changing the subject when it comes up, try leaning into the conversation. You might find it weirdly liberating. So how do you apply the Ars Moriendi without moving into a drafty castle and catching the plague? Here is the condensed, modern-friendly version. First, figure out what gives your life meaning and keep it in front of you. Second, forgive yourself for your mistakes and remember you can change your story. Third, stop rushing through your life like it is a bad movie you just want to end. Fourth, ditch the pride and let people help you. And fifth, enjoy what you have, but do not cling so hard you strangle it. If you do those 5 things now, then when death eventually does tap you on the shoulder, you will not be thinking, wait, I am not ready. You will be thinking, well, that was one wild ride and I nailed the landing, which is really the best anyone can hope for. Death will always be the big unavoidable plot twist, but it does not have to be a horror story. The medievals understood that, and for all our tech and medicine, we still need that lesson. Because in the end, the art of dying well is really the art of living well without pretending you are immortal. So maybe the next time you feel that creeping mortality anxiety, instead of distracting yourself with cat videos or buying a blender you do not need, try doing something the medievals would approve of. Call a friend, write something meaningful, let go of that pointless grudge, or just sit outside and watch the sky for a while, remembering that everything ends and that is exactly what makes it beautiful. Life is short, death is certain, And the only real question is how you are going to fill the space in between. The medievals thought that space should be full of purpose, humility, connection, and gratitude. Turns out, so do modern psychologists, minus the bits about demons trying to tempt you at your deathbed. So here is to living like you are ready to die, and dying like you lived without wasting a second. If you have learned something today, laughed at least once, or briefly considered writing your will, then mission accomplished. Now tell me in the comments, how do you think the art of dying well applies to your own life? And while you are at it, subscribe to XQ, Quick Funny Explanations, for more fast, funny, genius-level content delivered at the speed of laughter. Because one day, you will not be able to, and I think you should make the most of today.